And the story goes a little bit like this. So, a long, long time ago in Norway, there lived a giant called Thrym. And Thrym lived up on a mountain by a fjord, and he harboured an intense hatred for humanity. He hated human beings with an absolute passion. But you shouldn't get the wrong impression of giants. Not all of them hate humanity. Most of them are quite nice. And the vast majority of them didn't approve of Thrym's anger. But despite this, Thrym would sit up on his mountainside, simmering away, frothing with hate at humanity, until eventually his anger would bubble and boil and boil and bubble until it overflowed, and he would run down from his mountain shouting, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to catch you, I'm coming to eat you." And he'd go to the nearest village and he'd eat everyone in sight, and then he'd move to the next village and eat everyone there, and he did very much the same thing from village to village to village until he was too tired to continue, had no choice but to return to his mountain. Now, the lifetimes of giants are much longer than human beings, and much longer than human beings can remember. And so, about every 500 years or so, Thrym would do very much the same thing. He'd run off of his mountain, shouting, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to catch you, I'm coming to eat you." And of course, the same fate would befall each of the villages down the mountainside. And as I said before, not all giants are like this. They were all appalled by Thrym's behaviour. And eventually they decided that they had to do something about it. So all the giants of Norway came together and they made this decision, that Thrym would be exiled to the lands in the west where no human beings lived at all. And Thrym, he is quite a formidable threat to humanity, but even he could not face the united power of all the giants of Norway. So he had no choice. He had to go into exile. And so he waded out into the North Sea, and of course, being a giant, it only came up to about the bridge of his nose, so he could still peer over and see exactly where it was that he was going. And as he approached the lands in the west, he noticed that actually they weren't quite so uninhabited as he had been led to believe. Because out on the shore, on one of the islands that we now know today as being part of the Shetland Isles, out on the shore, there were gathered lots and lots of people looking out over the water, thinking, what on earth is this strange island? This oddly symmetrical island with these two weird caves that is drawing closer and closer. And by the time they realised what was happening, it was far too late, because from beneath the water, Thrym began to shout, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to catch you, I'm coming to eat you." And so he went up onto the island and he ate all of the people in sight, and he moved on to the next one and the next one and the next one until there were no people left on the Shetland Isles. And he stood there and he wondered, what on earth am I meant to do now? Until he saw to the south the islands that now we know today as the Orkney Isles. So he waded back into the North Sea and did very much the same thing there. And then on to Caithness, all the way around the north coast of Scotland, until eventually he came to a place called Applecross. Now, in Applecross they had heard rumours and murmurings of something coming from the north, some great grievous threat. And one day a boat arrived in Applecross from around the coast, and they told them of what was coming, what Thrym was like, what he was going to do to them, and they had time to come up with a plan. And this was the plan that they came up with. They dug a massive pit in Applecross, big enough for a giant the size of Thrym to fall in, and they chopped down all of the trees on all of the Western Isles and sharpened the end to points and drove them as stakes into the pit. And with all the leaves and all the branches that were left over, they made a carpet over the pit, so that no one would be able to see it besides those who knew it was there. And right enough, they saw the head of Thrym peering over the water, coming closer and closer and closer. And as he began to shout, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to catch you, I'm coming to eat you," all of the people of Applecross down on the shore began to shout names and taunt him and draw him closer and closer and bring him up into great anger, so that as he came up out of the water, he chased them. And as he chased them, all of the adults split around the pit, and all of the children ran right across, because they were light enough to move across the carpet without falling through. And right enough, Thrym did not notice what was coming, and he fell into the pit. But even from the pit, this was not enough. He began to shout, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to catch you, I'm coming to eat you." And he began to move himself up off of all the stakes. So what the villagers did was they sharpened all of their swords, all of their axes, all of their blades, and they went down and they chopped Thrym up into little bits. And they thought, well, surely this must be the end of Thrym. No one could have survived that. But each little bit of Thrym sprouted arms and legs and began to shout, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to catch you, I'm coming to eat you." And so all these bits began to pull the stakes up out of the ground and built a ladder up to the top of the pit, and the villagers began to panic. They wondered, what on earth is it that we're going to do about this? And so quickly they ran into the village. They picked up all of the flaming logs that they could, set fire to all of the sticks that they could, and threw them over the side into the pit, just as that very first bit of Thrym put his hand onto the top rung of the ladder. And eventually, with all the trees down in the pit, it caught fire. And before any of these bits could climb up over the edge, they fell down and they were consumed in the flame. And now the villagers were sure, of course, he's been turned to ash. There is no way that Thrym could have survived this. So they went home and they celebrated. They feasted and they drank and they drank and they danced and they drank and they feasted until they were so tired that it was time to go to bed. But as they were drawing back home, they noticed that the ash was falling down, drifting down from the pit. They began to run around in a frenzy, because you cannot escape ash. But very quickly, their panic began to settle, because they noticed that these little bits of ash could only draw one drop of blood at a time. And they couldn't come too near to the fire because the smoke would choke them. And they were so small that they could only keep so much water in their bellies, so they had to stay close to the rivers, the sea, the lochs. And they didn't particularly like the cold either, so they only really came out on hot summer nights. And of course, we know these little bits of ash today, and we do not call them Thrym. We know them by a different name, and that is Midgeys. So that is a very stupid story about where Midgeys come from.